Well, we better start off straight away with the continuing chaos in the Middle East as Iranian media report another missile barrage on Israel as both countries launched missiles towards each other overnight.
There's been all sorts of explosions taking place in Tel Aviv, and they've also been reportedly heard in the Iranian capital, Tehran.
Well, many world leaders have called for restraint, whilst President Trump warned of further attacks on Iran.
Well, we're now joined by senior British military advisor, Major General Chip Chapman. Good morning to you, Chip. It's been an amazing last 24 hours or so, hasn't it? Does it surprise you? Do you think it's going to get worse? Where's it going to lead?
Well, it didn't surprise me, and there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, Iran is now very, very weak, and it was really protected by its proxies, of which the golden child of that was Hezbollah. That is largely being removed as a strategic deterrent. Secondly, the fall of the Assad regime has given freedom of action for the Israelis to go across to Iran. And thirdly, the two attacks which there was reciprocation from both Israel and Iran in April and October 24 means that Israel has really stripped the air defense cover from Iran, which gives them the freedom of action. So was the weakness of Iran is there. The moment critique from an Israeli perspective was that they thought they were going to a sort of weaponization phase now. So that sets the context to this. There was retaliation from the Iranians in both April and October 24. So this is largely a war of missiles. I don't think we're leading to a regional conflagration, a sort of World War III scenario. Indeed, at the moment, from both sides, you've got what we would call a shock and withhold doctrine. So the shock from the Iranian retaliation is to try and do a clout, don't dribble in terms of ballistic missiles to overwhelm the air defenses of Israel. There will always be some leakage of that, but the withhold is that they won't go towards targets in the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all those countries. What I do think you'll get to, because tomorrow in Oman is the sixth round of negotiations over the limiting the Iranian nuclear position. I think there will be an off-ramp at some stage, and that off-ramp will be going towards a sort of JCPOA redux, that is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the thing which formally limited the Iranian nuclear fissile material.
I mean, it's interesting that this is it's a multi-pronged attack, isn't it, really, Chip? Because obviously not only you've got the military action from Israel, and of course the United States now joining in the defence of Israel with the retaliatory strikes, but you've also got Bibi Netanyahu saying to the people of Iran, it's time to stand up. Now, destabilising a regime would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it? I mean, not just for Israel, but for the West.
It would. So again, you have to separate two things there. So the main objective for Israel is to knock out the nuclear sites so that you don't have this escalation towards enrichment and then weaponization. And secondly, to knock out the ballistic missile capability of the Iranians. So that is absolutely the main objective. The secondary objective, as you alluded to there, Stephen, is the fight is not with the Iranian people, but with the Iranian leadership. That is also why I think you'll get to an off-ramp position, because the Iranian regime objectives are always quite limited. The first and overriding one is regime survival, and the second one is domestic security, making sure that they can deal with civil unrest. The danger for them at the moment is because there's been a lot of infiltration and commando type raids, or the use of commando forces either inspired by the Mossad or people they've recruited within Iran, particularly in terms of the precision strike against the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps generals, is that the Iranian regime become very paranoid. And that can be a weakness, because you could get a clampdown on the people, which does lead to some sort of collapse of the Iranian regime. And you should never mistake an oppressive regime for a stable regime. And that is a danger for the Iranians, particularly because in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had this notion of women life freedom, where people don't generally like the theocratic Islamic regime. They would like to go towards some sort of Western model if they were allowed. That is why I do think there'll be this off-ramp, because the prime objective of the Iranian regime is that regime survival. It is a very low bar.
And it's not just about missiles at the moment either, is it? There's a lot of unseen activity going on, what they're calling Mossad-style activity, where key members of the government and nuclear scientists and others have been taken out in some way.
Yeah, that's a decapitation strategy from the Israelis. And again, really shows how exquisite their intelligence is in being able to locate these senior leaders and use precision strike upon them. That is why you get this paranoia again from the Iranian regime about their ability to do this. And I think there's also been a warning to the Iranian leadership that should they cause mass casualty at a mass casualty event in Israel, then Israel may then target the Iranian regime leaders itself, not just those military leaders from the IRGC and the nuclear scientists. And Israel might go after the oil refineries of Iran. So there's a warning there from the Israelis to the Iranians, because the Iranians at the moment still produce 2.1 million barrels of oil per day, and they really need to get that out because of their sanctions regime and the fact that they do have a restive population. However, if you were to go to the right of arc, one of the things in terms of the Iranian scenario that we always say is that they could close the Strait of Hormuz, limiting the export, for example, of Saudi Arabian oil. That itself would mean that geopolitics trumps market fundamentals in terms of the oil. And of course, no one likes a spike in the price of oil. I think it's currently gone up to $74 a barrel. They've probably priced in a rise to $80 a barrel. But to put that into perspective, just after 7th of October 2023, when we had the attack on Israel, oil went up to $90 a barrel there. So that generally these things are priced in by the market.
What do you make of what President Trump said in all of this, telling the Iranian regime to accept a deal? I mean, you've talked about off-ramping in all of this, but telling the Iranians to accept a deal before there's nothing left. I mean, it's very strong rhetoric, but you wonder if this is a regime that would ever want to accept any sort of deal under these circumstances.
Well, I do think this is part of the pressure strategy. And as I've said, this sort of notion of drinking from the chalice of poison is something in Iranian doctrine where you sometimes have to do things that you absolutely don't want to do. They've done that twice historically under the Islamic regime, with the ending of the war with Iraq in 1988, and secondly with the release of the American hostages. So that's what I think will happen. The danger is that it's the difference between a maximalist thing, which some of the Americans might want, which is thou shalt not have a nuclear program of any type, and a minimalist program, which is you can enrich to a certain level, which essentially was what the former Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was, that negotiated in 2015, but which actually Trump withdrew from in 2019.
I mean, if you live long enough, you see these wars pop up from time to time. What an old boss of mine used to call small wars. They always happen. And we've seen these sort of, I hesitate to call it a skirmish because it's clearly more deadly than that. But how long before a major force becomes involved? We've already heard that the Americans were helping shoot down some incoming missiles last night. Is that classified as American support? And at what stage does America feel it's being dragged in, and therefore other forces will inevitably join?
Well, it's a great question. One of the things, of course, that the Americans did was say that they had no involvement in what was a unilateral strike by the Israelis. That was signaling to the Iranians, don't attack the US bases in the region, otherwise we'll come after you. You're absolutely right as well that one of the assets that the Americans have in theatre is the thing called the Theatre High Altitude Area Defense, the THAAD system. That also helps the Arrow system of the Israelis to knock down long-range ballistic missiles in a sort of defensive posture. I don't think that they will get involved. In the absolute worst case, of course, there are bases just across the Strait of Hormuz. There's a big American base at Al Udeid in Qatar. They've got assets in UAE, in Kuwait, and in the UAE. I don't think these Iranians will go after that. Again, coming back to that prime thing they want, which is regime survival. If you want to commit suicide as a nation, the Iranian nation, then going after the US bases would be a disastrous thing to do. And you wouldn't have the deniable aspect of that from using proxy forces anymore.
OK, Major General Chip Chapman, good to see you. Thanks for your analysis this morning.
It's very frightening and unbelievably impressive watching the Iron Dome system in action. If you've been watching incoming news all through the night, it's a terrible thing to watch, but it clearly is very effective. Not completely. Obviously, some missiles are getting through. But it must be terrifying to live there at the moment, to be anywhere in that region.
Yeah. It is absolutely frightening. It's just what happens next with all of this. And it's fascinating, the off-ramping. But is that something that the West would really want, or that Trump would want? The idea that it could end up back in negotiations? Or do they want, now they've started, do they want to just see the end of this regime?
It's also very interesting, it being President Trump's birthday today, and the fact that they are having this enormous military parade. I mean, they're actually going to show off warfare stuff.
It's very
a bit
sort of
Red Square-ish, yes,
yeah,
isn't it?
Very Russian.
But maybe it's a good time to be doing it.
Yeah, possibly. Possibly.
Show off the American might. I mean, that's certainly what Trump's rhetoric is, isn't it? You know, you cross us and we will annihilate you, is basically what he's saying.
Yes.
And he's going to show off some of the military hardware in a big military parade in DC today.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because he is the president who wants peace. It's what he's always said. But then there's the argument...
That's how you protect peace.
You get peace through strength.